Welcome to Ghost TV and 91.9 Public Affairs. I'm Micah Terrell. April 29, 2017 marks 100 days that President Donald Trump has been in office. A lot has happened and then a lot has not. Here to break it all down with us is Dr. David Canervo, Professor Emeritus of Austin Peay's Political Science Department. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Micah, for having me.
Great. Now let's get started about promises made during the campaign and promises kept. We know President Trump during the campaign obviously made several of those, all part of his sort of businessman style of negotiation. You know, it's my way or the highway kind of thing. And first of all, NAFTA is the most recent one that I wanted to talk about with you, the North American Free Trade Agreement. He said during the campaign, hey, NAFTA is no good, we're going to leave it. But then recently he just said, yes, the U.S. is going to stay in NAFTA. Could you talk more about those developments?
Sure. You're right that during the campaign he said that we always make bad trade deals, that NAFTA was an example of that. And what he has learned, I think more recently, is that perhaps NAFTA wasn't such a bad deal and is not such a problem. And one of the things that we are discovering during the first 100 days of the presidency is that there's a steep learning curve for President Trump. As a businessman who had never held public office before, things are quite different in the political world than they are in the business world. So he's got to work with others, compromise with others. He's getting information that he really did not have before. And so he's very proud of the fact that he's willing to change his mind on things. And we've seen him do that a great deal over the last 97 days as he's discovered that some of the things that he touted during the campaign are not necessarily in our interest right now to do. And NAFTA is one of those. John McCain in an interview, for example, said that NAFTA is a program that helps his state of Arizona a great deal. And I think he's hearing that from other members of Congress as well.
And definitely with the case with Obamacare too, you know, and during the campaign, Donald Trump said, you know, Obamacare is no good, we need to just toss it all out. But he noticed that, and it seems like learning on the job experience, that maybe it's not so bad after all, and it sounds like there's plans in the works for maybe another something, because that first plan didn't actually fell flat, right? Sure,
and of course one of the things that he discovered was that the Republican Party is not so unified. We have what's called the Freedom Caucus of very conservative Republicans who have really been kind of a thorn in his side, particularly as it relates to the Obamacare and the repeal and replacement of Obama's health care program. The administration currently is working on Plan B since the first one did not pass. Whether that is going to pass remains to be seen. Apparently they've made a number of compromises with the conservatives and the Freedom Caucus, but whether that will alienate the moderates in the party, of course, is something we need to see in the next few days, it appears, as they're getting ready to roll out that new plan.
How feasible do you think it is for President Trump to reach out to Democrats? Because I know he's sort of entertained the idea lately, like it might be not such a bad idea, particularly with the health care reform.
Well, I would like to see him do that. When the Freedom Caucus blocked his first plan, my feeling was that he should then reach out to the more moderate to conservative Democrats and see if they wouldn't be willing to work with him, form a coalition that would allow him to get a number of things passed, putting together the moderate Republicans and the more moderate to conservative Democrats into a winning coalition. He appears to not be doing that for whatever reason. Now, supposedly, President Obama, as he was leaving office, asked the Democrats in Congress not to throw Trump a lifeline and to work with him, particularly on the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And so that may be what's going on as well, that regardless of what Trump and the Republicans propose, the Democrats are not going to come on board to try to save the replacement. Now, I wonder if it would be possible for him to say we'll leave the Affordable Care Act in its broad outline, but then tweak the things that appear to not be working and see if he couldn't get some Democrats on board that way. But again, that's not the route he's taking right now.
Right. So I guess it all remains to be seen what we
Yes.
end up with, right?
Right.
Now let's talk a little bit about immigration. I know it's a tough situation for President Obama. You struggled with this, and of course President Trump is struggling with it too. And of course one of his Trump's first executive orders was the travel ban. And that order was blocked by the courts, still kind of weaving its way through. And now a federal judge has basically enjoined the administration from withholding the funding for the sanctuary cities and everything. So, many voters have said, we want, people to be taken care of here, Americans here, whereas many others say, well, wait a minute, we have people in war-torn countries who need refuge. So obviously, how does Trump measure up with this, and how, I guess, can he sort of work with this issue?
Well, it's not clear, of course, how this is going to be resolved. Right now, it's somewhat of a roadblock with the courts stopping his every move on the immigration issue. What I think is going to have to happen is that there'll be an accommodation on his part in which he, number one, either gets legislation amended that will allow him to withhold funds from the sanctuary cities. That may or may not be possible. Of course, the Democrats could block it with filibuster, as they did with the Affordable Care Act. It's also a matter of whether Trump is going to just simply learn over the next several weeks that there are certain things that he's not going to be able to get accomplished. And the wall may be one of those. He's already had to back down a little bit, saying that he's not willing to shut down the government over getting money for the wall incorporated in the new budget. And so we'll just have to see. He's going to have to compromise a great deal on many of his promises, it appears. With the wall specifically, it's a question of whether it makes sense to spend billions of dollars on a wall that over the next decade or so may be something which the next president is not going to want to support. It creates an image which, again, the next president and Congress don't necessarily want to support. And it may be something which is not going to be realistic. It's going to be a very expensive project. And whether he's going to find the funding for it, because after all, Congress controls funding, appropriations, and so that's going to be a real problem for him.
It is, and I've been reading too about there are several families who live in that Rio Grande Valley who are American, who could end up being, having a legal challenge with the government over this wall, maybe blocking them out, officially of the United States proper. So it's just, I think, a bigger issue maybe than President Trump realized from the beginning.
That's right, and there's some farms, I think, that may actually cross the border a little bit, and so you'd be blocking people from getting to their land. And I, of course, cannot see that as something which is legal.
No, definitely not. Now let's talk about the tax cuts. President Trump is obviously working on some of the biggest tax cuts in history, reforming the tax code. And some worry, okay, this is going to lead to a huge deficit, while others say, hey, this might stimulate the economy. What do you think maybe President Trump's business mind is thinking that might not josh that well with government budgetary proceedings?
Well, of course, what he's thinking is that tax cuts will allow the businesses to make more money, hire more people, expand, that sort of thing. That's the plan. At the same time, though, we have seen tax cuts like this under the Reagan administration to get us out of a recession. And while it did accomplish that, one of the other effects of it was to increase our budget deficit tremendously. We know that as jobs are created, that tax receipts go up, but will the tax receipts go up enough to cover the loss of revenue? Trump is saying that that's what's going to happen, but it did not happen under Reagan. Tax cuts under Bush, George W. Bush, did not necessarily pay for themselves either. And so we don't have a good track record of tax cuts fulfilling the promise of creating enough economic activity that they will in fact pay for themselves or certainly increase revenue.
Definitely. Now let's talk a little bit about NATO and China. Regarding China, candidate Trump said, NATO is obsolete, and he basically said China was just a manipulator. But now that he's taken office, he's kind of reversed himself, saying, NATO is no longer obsolete, and he's actually been, speaking with China and being civil. So what does this say about his change in attitude toward global politics?
Well, I think he's beginning to learn that dealing with other nations is also complicated, as is healthcare. And so it's a matter of learning to work with people and to understand that, of course, every country has its own interests. And just as Trump wants America to be first, the Chinese want China to be first. The Brits, the French want their countries to be first as well. And so it's a matter of trying to reach reasonable accommodations with these countries so that we can work together to everyone's benefit. NATO, I think, does have problems. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I do tend to agree with some of the things he said during his campaign, that we, for the most part, have been funding NATO. We are the ones who tend to put our military members' lives on the line much more than the other NATO countries. And so I'm not sure that the other countries in NATO have been spending their fair share or contributing their fair share of military personnel and weapons. So there is an imbalance. The question is how we overcome that. If we look at some of the historical things that have happened, the genocide that occurred in Bosnia and Kosovo there in Europe, the NATO countries did very little to aid the Muslims in those countries, and essentially sat back and allowed the genocide to occur. And that's unspeakable that they would allow that to happen. But nevertheless, they did. It was American action which to a great degree brought it to an end. So unfortunately, while Trump has some reasonable points in regard to NATO and also China, he needs to use them as much as possible and accommodate them.
Now, what about North Korea? We've heard it's been a lot of saber rattling with them. They're trying, testing out their nuclear missiles and talking about war, and obviously there could be some kind of situation. How is Trump going to handle this? Because President Kim Jong-un doesn't seem to be one that really wants to negotiate or really talk about anything, and that's such a hard nut to crack, it seems.
Right. Well, of course, many people have characterized Kim Jong-un as not a very rational person. Mm-hmm. And how rational he really is, we don't know, quite honestly. One of the things which is characteristic of North Korea is that going back to his grandfather, who was the first communist leader of North Korea after World War II, the family has developed what's called a cult of personality, where they seek to build up their image, their family, as essentially those in the country to be worshipped. And I can't help but wonder if much of this rhetoric from Kim Jong-un is part of that, so that he's trying to show himself, portray himself as this glorious leader who's willing to do anything for the country. So how much of it is rhetoric and how much of it is genuine threat that we should be concerned about? And that's what's difficult, certainly for me. It's difficult to determine how serious he really is in putting North Korean lives and his own government on the line, because there's not much doubt, I think, that we are so much stronger militarily than North Korea is, that while there would be serious losses in South Korea if there was a war, and perhaps Japan as well, the North Korean government would be wiped out if we were to launch an attack. And so the question is he willing to really recognize that and also put that on the line?
Yeah, we'll have to see.
And that we don't know, that's right.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Russia too. Obviously, a lot of things have happened recently with Russia. There's the whole resignation of the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, that happened because of questions about the Trump's administration's links with Russia. And of course, now there's the whole investigation with the dossier and everything. What do you think about this whole situation with Russia? Do you think it's just trumped up kind of situation, or could there maybe really be something to this?
I suspect that there were some relationships that certainly outside government, there were a number of people who have advised Trump who had one kind of relationship or another with Russia, whether it's business relationships or something else. And so that is troubling. At the same time, it's been very clear, I think, that certainly the last 3 or 4 weeks, that Trump and Russia are not on the same page and working together smoothly. And so, you know, perhaps you can do what might be considered an ultimate scam, in which Trump and Putin are working out this fight between each other for the purpose of downplaying any kind of positive, serious relationship. I doubt that that's what's going on, though. I really do think that there are significant differences, which Trump is learning on the job as well. Putin is not someone who is a very nice player in world affairs. We've seen that with Crimea, we've seen it with the Ukraine, that he's willing to push and do what he wants and dare other countries to fight back. Certainly, I think he did try to influence the election, because he bought into Trump's rhetoric that he wanted to get along with Russia and Putin, and perhaps Putin believed that Trump was going to be someone who he could push around, if not work seamlessly with. So I think Putin has perhaps learned a little bit as well, and Trump has learned, I think, a great deal over the last 2 months about who Putin really is, what Russia is doing, and the fact that they're a very difficult country to work with, and Putin particularly is a difficult leader to work with.
Definitely, it seems like with the instance with Syria, where of course there was the airstrike there, and of course Russia seems to be supplying some items to Assad there. So it seems like maybe that was another big step in showing that, hey, you know, Russia's not playing around, probably.
Sure. Russia, I suspect, was very complicit in the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime against his own people. They had to know what was going on and that they were still there. Of course, under Obama, Putin said that he would make sure that the chemical weapons were destroyed or gotten out of the country. He said that that had happened, and of course he was lying, because obviously they were used recently. And so I think Trump recognizes that as Putin's dishonesty. Now, we tried to play very carefully to make sure that Russia was not going to be hurt physically by the strike, the missile strike by the United States. At the same time, Russia has gotten, I think, the sense that Trump also is someone who is trying to be a tough player, and someone who, when he says military options are on the table, means it.
And maybe also the strike too with that very large bomb in Afghanistan too. Exactly.
Exactly. I don't think there's a reason to think that Trump will do anything to strike Russia or Russian forces in Syria militarily. But at the same time, this is a signal to Russia that we have our limits as well as to what we will accept, that when we say there is a red line, that we are serious about there being a red line, and that military action will be taken, very measured military action, but it will be taken when Trump thinks it's justified.
Now let's go touch back on the executive orders again, because we obviously talked about several previously. But before he won the White House, remember candidate Trump said, he didn't like those. He was like, oh, nah, but it looks like in this first 100 days he signed more than any other president since World War II. So what limits, if any, do restrict this president's use of executive power?
Well, of course, executive orders are limited because they cannot be used to simply overturn legislation, or certainly overturn the Constitution. And so constitutional limits, statutory limits certainly do constrict what the president can do through executive order. Executive orders can be useful for certain things where there is precedent of action being determined by executive order. Of course, that can be reversed by executive order. But beyond that, there really are quite serious limits as to what can be accomplished that way. And of course, we're seeing that with the tax legislation. We're seeing it with the repeal and replacement of Affordable Care Act, with various other things that we're seeing Trump trying to roll out legislatively.
Now let's talk a little bit about the sort of constant state of flux of the cabinet and the administration, the close advisors to President Trump. Obviously we mentioned Flynn, and he was kind of tossed out pretty early on, and things always just constantly, even I've read on different news websites that the people who work there are like, we just don't know, there seems to be no job security. What kind of tone do you think that sets for government in the Trump administration?
Well, Trump, as a businessman, is not used, I think, to having a cabinet. He's very much the central player in his own business, or at least was. And so having this notion of cabinet officials is running different departments, I think is new to him. He's not quite sure what to do with it. And I think he's put into some of the cabinet positions, for example, such as former Governor Perry of Texas, in the Department of Energy. This is a person who wanted to abolish the Department of Energy as a presidential candidate. And then to put him in charge kind of sends the message that Trump doesn't see that department as being terribly crucial. And so I think he's not someone who sees these domestic agencies as so important, and he's willing to let them kind of float along on their own without doing much with them, quite frankly. And so I'm not sure he sees the cabinet positions as terribly important. He wants to eventually have an infrastructure bill, I believe. Beyond that, and the health care, the tax cuts, I'm not sure what he wants to accomplish. He doesn't want to regulate energy, he wants to produce it. He's already rolled back by executive order some environmental regulations, and so it's not clear that he wants the Environmental Protection Agency to do very much. And so I think these are just agencies that he's just kind of pushed aside a little bit willing to forget about them for the most part so that he can concentrate on the 3 or 4 major things in his first term that he's concerned with, not paying much attention to the others. So you're certainly right that the cabinet officials might feel themselves a little uneasy. I think it was during the lunch he had with the UN Security Council members, in which he said that, well, Nikki Haley could be replaced. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're the ambassador to the UN and you're sitting there and the president, your boss, says, well, it'd be easy to replace you, that doesn't give you a whole big vote of confidence. And so I think he sees personnel as interchangeable, as not so important, and many of these agencies is not very important.
Well, and you touched a little bit on the EPA. It seems though like there could be, legal issues with that because, Scott Pruitt has even said, I think I have a quote here, he says that he intends to run the agency in such a manner to foster responsible protection of the environment and freedom for American businesses to maybe that might create a conflict of interest, do you think? Sure.
And those two statements are in some conflict in that how do you foster protection for the environment while at the same time deregulating business so that they are freer to mess up the environment. And so at some point, it's the statutory language which is going to become important. Again, through executive order, the president can reverse some of the things that Obama had done through executive order. But when it comes down to the real nitty-gritty of environmental protection, that is locked in legislatively right now. And so it's easy for court challenges to occur when we find businesses apparently violating EPA regulations or statutory regulations, and the courts will get involved as people bring lawsuits down the road.
Now, what about Trump himself? Obviously, there's that defamation suit that was filed against him, I think just prior to his inauguration, the day before. He was sued by a former contestant on The Apprentice, and then the 3 Trump protesters filed suit against the president for the violence that was inflicted on them during a Trump rally in 2016. So attorneys in the defamation suit specifically, I believe, they assert the supremacy clause of the Constitution that say it should bar the suit from proceeding while he's sitting as president because that might detract him from his duties. So to what extent does a sitting president enjoy immunity from civil suits, particularly while he's in office?
Well, that's something lawyers and constitutional attorneys would need to decide on, and ultimately the courts would need to decide on that. Generally, we have not seen presidents harassed by civil suits while they have been in office. And so it will be a matter to see whether, in fact, those suits can proceed as long as he's in office. I would argue that the proving defamation is very difficult, of course, because of the public figure rule. And so the question is, did those people that claim defamation by Trump, were they considered public figures? Maybe they were, maybe they're not, I don't know. And so that's got to be determined. And beyond that, it's a matter of whether the courts will allow the suits to proceed.
Well, regardless of the suits, regardless of whatever the executive orders, it seems like Trump's supporters, for the most part, still are supporting him. A recent poll I saw, ABC News and Washington Post, said like 96%, almost 100% said we'd vote for him again if the election was held all over. Comparing that, though, to like the American people overall, only like 42% said that they would vote again for the president. So what do you think this says about polarization between the various viewpoints politically?
Well, unfortunately, we still are a very polarized nation. The Trump supporters on one side, the anti-Trump on the other, of course, and they have very strong feelings about their positions. We have the anti-Trump folks who are more environmentalists. These are folks who believe in national health care. They believe in government doing more things, providing social services for people, helping to provide the safety net for the poor. And so we have that group on one side, and beyond that, of course, people who are offended by some of Trump's rhetoric, both current and past rhetoric, certainly as it relates to women and minority group members. And then we have the Trump people who argue, look, for the past 20, 30 years, we've had politicians who have not solved our problems. It's time to give a businessman the chance. Let him drain the swamp and try to do things that have not been done before and see what happens.
Now, what about Ivanka? She tried to defend her father recently. She was at an event in Berlin with several other women, and of course, it was brought up, the whole tape where he said some very rude things about women. And she's like, "Wait a minute, my dad, he's all about helping family and women." And she was booed and hissed. Apparently, there's still those attitudes that Trump is not supportive of women's issues.
Sure, and of course, Ivanka is going to see her father from a quite different perspective. I suspect that he's been a good father to her, that certainly she has a very important position, both within the White House and before that within his company, that he has listened to her and respects her, that she has been treated well, and that to a great degree probably he has treated women within his company and certainly within his family reasonably well. Outside of that, he's one of the locker room boys, I suppose, and engages in the locker room talk and wants to be part of that kind of environment outside of his business when he's out with the boys. And so he's, I'm sure, a different person around Ivanka and his family members than he is out by himself with his male friends.
Probably so. He's probably, I guess, endearing himself to a lot of those male voters.
Sure, and to a certain extent, we all have somewhat different roles that we play, depending on the company that we're with at the time and the situation we find ourselves in at the time. And Trump is very much that way. Certainly if you go back to Bill Clinton, his treatment of women and his behavior around women, aside from Hillary, was quite different from, I suspect, the way he treated Hillary. And so I would argue that's not terribly uncommon.
Definitely not. Now, what about Ivanka and Jared Kushner being advisors to President Trump? Obviously, President Trump has stepped back from the family business and sort of turned control over to others. But do you see any conflict of interest there with them being, close advisors to him?
Well, potentially, particularly, of course, with Ivanka's business. And I don't know what Jared has done with his business. He claims he has separated himself from it legally. My sense is that Trump has relied heavily on Kushner and Ivanka in his own business, that he trusts their thinking, that he obviously has great respect for their ideas, and that he wanted that with him in the White House, that he feels comfortable with them. After all, Trump is very much an outsider politically. He's not held public office, he's not worked with other politicians all that closely, and so Ivanka and Jared are his political family that he can go to, talk honestly with, and listen to, and be willing to listen to carefully. So I think he sees them as important advisors to him. And as long as there are no illegal conflicts of interest in business, then I think that's not inappropriate.
Because I know some have questioned, why should she have this security clearance and everything that, obviously she's not her dad, and she doesn't need to be, briefed on every security change that happens. So some I know have brought that up as a
Well, that's
concern.
right, but at the same time, if she is going to be in the White House and if she is really going to be talking with him seriously about a whole range of issues, then perhaps the security clearance is not unwise, because it seems to me that inevitably issues will come up that may involve national security in some respect, and to have to be very careful around her and what you say so as not to overstep the bounds there is very important.
Now, what about Melania, the First Lady? We don't see her a lot. It's really different because we went from, President Obama and Michelle Obama. We saw Michelle a lot. We saw her doing all sorts of, different initiatives, helping children with health in general. It was a big, thing for her, very public sort of campaign. And now Melania is out of the spotlight a lot more. What do you think that has to say about maybe her role in the White House and the Trump administration?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, she's not a political person. Michelle Obama, of course, was an attorney and had been involved in politics through her husband for years. This is a whole new game for Trump's wife. And so for Melania to be involved politically, I think is something she's not terribly comfortable with right now. Also, I think secondly, the fact that they've got a young son who is in school and wants to finish the school year in New York is legitimate and important. Makes him feel comfortable. She is comfortable being the stay-at-home mother with him. And I think we'll need to wait and see what happens after the school year is over in a few weeks, and what kind of role she plays then when they move down to the White House full-time.
Now let's talk about Trump and the media. It's been a pretty rough road for the mainstream media particularly.
Sure.
Some were held out from White House briefings, and he's gone on the attack on Twitter, and actually, some of his administrators, Sean Spicer, the press secretary, has literally said, you guys are purporting fake news. So what do some opponents feel? Obviously, this might be setting a dangerous precedent, blocking people out of briefings, while others say, wait a minute, the media needs to step up and do their job better. What do you think about that?
Well, Trump, of course, is someone who has been very much criticized in the media from the very beginning of his campaign. People have looked at him skeptically. People have underrated him in terms of his ability to, of course, first win the nomination and then the presidency. And so he feels, I'm sure, that he's been under attack for the things that he has said, and perhaps reasonably so, but nevertheless, he feels that he's been under attack by the media, and that perhaps he's not been treated in a quote-unquote fair and balanced way always, that he sees himself accomplishing more than what is being reported about him. So on the one hand, I can see that that's on his mind. He is also someone who appears to be narcissistic and wants the attention, wants the applause in the media, and he's not getting that. And so he's angry. And and of course, we know that news media reporters tend to be primarily Democratic, and while some do a much better job of hiding that and playing a neutral role, others are not quite as adept at that. And so I think he's just a very sensitive person in regard to what people say about him, how he's treated. And so he's fighting back.
And it's funny to me that it seems in the more recent times that he's like, oh, the New York Times, who he called out by name on Twitter and said, you're just fake news, all about, and he's given more interviews to them than some maybe other media outlets. So it's kind of interesting to see that sort of change, maybe part of that learning curve that you mentioned earlier.
Sure. I think if you, excuse me, look at the last 4 to 6 weeks as opposed to the first 4 to 6 weeks, that there has been a change. There's been a little bit less twittering, I think, on the part of Trump, a little bit of what I would call mellowing out in regard to the media. He's not attacking them quite as much. And there's been a little bit more, again, of accommodation on his part and understanding that being attacked is one of the things that the media do. They're going to question him about things. And he's been, of course, fast and loose with his words, with his hyperbole and his concern about how many people were at the inauguration, how many people have done this or done that, and what his ratings are, and his hypersensitivity to his own personal image, I think, is perhaps starting to shrink a little bit so that he's not so openly attacking the news media as he was early on. Now, whether that will continue is another matter, but nevertheless, I think there has been a little bit of improvement on his part there.
Because I was going to ask you that it seems like on Twitter he's not as, I guess, vitriolic as he's been, you know, in the past. So
That's
maybe
right.
that shows some growth, maybe.
That's right.
Definitely. Now, where do we go from here? Obviously, it's been sort of a roller coaster ride, if you will. We've seen all kinds of things happen and then not happen. So what do you think is next?
Well, I guess I would predict over the next 9 months, rest of the year, that there will be what I would call leveling out, that the first 3 or 4 weeks bordered on chaos as he tried to do so many things, was not perhaps well prepared. His staff was not well prepared. He was not so knowledgeable about how government works. And so there were lots of rough spots, to say the least, during that first 4 weeks. I think as he has learned a little bit more about the office and about how things work, how Washington works, that there'll be a little bit more evening out. There are still going to be rough spots and bumps in the road for him. But I think nevertheless that there will be some greater willingness to listen to Congress, to work with people, and to move ahead. Now, are we going to agree with what he does? Maybe, maybe not. Depending on what he does with the wall, depending on what happens with the replacement of Affordable Care Act, all those things still are ahead of us. I think he's starting to get some decent reviews on foreign policy, the fact that we have certainly not gone to war yet with North Korea,
Right.
or that he responded to Syria in a very measured way. I mean, people are appalled by the fact that Syria would use poison gas on their own citizens. And it's probably something that needed to be addressed by the United States. He did it in a very measured, controlled way, and I think people are responding fairly positively to that. And so I think as he learns the job better and listens to people more and thinks through things rather than just acting impulsively, that we're going to have a little bit smoother ride. It will be, I think, again, a fairly conservative administration and pushing out conservative policies, which people may or may not like, depending, again, on what side of the fence you're on. But nevertheless, I think that the chaos of the first 4 weeks may not be quite as widespread and repeated as much during the next few months.
But I'm sure we'll see lots of changes continually because he seems to be, I guess you mentioned prior, he's just one of those people, just, he's not afraid of changing things and doing things. What do you think he may have learned from maybe prior presidents? Because I know he talked about he had respected some, I believe Teddy Roosevelt was one of his, people he admired. What do you think he may have learned from those prior presidents that might be helping him now?
Well, my hope is that he's learned from them that presidents are not dictators. That despite the fact that Teddy Roosevelt, for example, wanted to accomplish a number of things and wanted to do a number of things, he was sometimes blocked. The same was true with Roosevelt's cousin Franklin, that Franklin didn't always get what he wanted when he wanted it. And so I think if he were to sit back and reflect on prior presidencies, he would learn that Congress is a significant body that must be worked with cooperatively. Perhaps eventually he will learn that the courts are significant bodies and that rather than criticizing them pretty vociferously as he has, that he needs to learn that they are significant players in our system and that he needs to act accordingly and propose actions and legislation and executive orders particularly that are going to pass muster in the courts.
And how much do you think American people are learning from him as he learns too? Because obviously he's on a world stage. We see everything that he does through television, social media, and everything. How much do you think we're learning from his learning about the checks and balances of the branches of government?
I think we will learn, particularly his critics. Those who have supported him are still right there, as you said, behind him. But his critics, those who, number one, either didn't trust him or hated him from day one, are going to look at results. And if, in fact, unemployment and the economy get better, if the deficit does not skyrocket, if there is some fairness in the tax plan, if the Affordable Care Act is replaced with something which actually does improve it and provide better, cheaper coverage to more people, then I think people will sit back and recognize those accomplishments and think, well, maybe he wasn't so bad. Reagan was someone who came into office viewed very warily by a lot of moderates to liberals. And while he was still criticized a lot, he became, I think, a little bit more accepted as not such a crazy person as some may have seen him early on. And I think Trump may face the same sort of review over the next several months. There will be some who will never accept him, never appreciate him. The question is whether those in the middle can be won over by seeing positive results. But for that to happen, there have to be positive results. Things have to get done that do benefit Americans. And I think that's particularly true in health care. People who have health care under the Affordable Care Act lose it. That's not going to sit well with people. There are too many people in this country who are facing serious illnesses like cancer who have been helped by the Affordable Care Act. And for them to lose that coverage and benefit is not going to be something which is very acceptable to a lot of people. The same is going to be true with foreign affairs. If we're engaged in new wars, if we have a serious loss of life because of North Korea, if we get into a shooting war with the Russians, which I don't expect to happen, but certainly there could be some minor skirmishes that occur. If we get involved in Syria in a big way, if things go south in Iraq and Afghanistan, those are going to be consequences that will certainly not help his historical view of his presidency.
And obviously we're early in, it's 100 days, but if harking back to days when you were teaching classes, what grade would you give him right now?
Oh gosh, I guess I give him a C or a C minus probably.
Yeah.
Because of his rhetoric, because of his hyperbole and related to that he is so concerned about his own image rather than real accomplishments, that he exaggerates things terrifically. And so I think he needs to mellow out on those aspects of his presidency and his life, his rhetoric, and really focus on working with Congress, working with the Democrats in Congress as well, and really trying to get things accomplished that make a difference positively in people's lives. He said during the campaign that he wants everyone to be covered by health care, that he wants to improve health care and make it cheaper. Well, I think one of the real tests for him is whether he will accomplish that.
Definitely.
And I think that's a big deal to a lot of people.
That's probably one of the overwhelmingly top things, right? The wall,
Sure.
But I mean, healthcare is obviously something we all want to have.
And spending billions of dollars on a wall, which may or may not be worth it, and probably wouldn't be worth it, as opposed to people losing health care, that's not going to sit well, I wouldn't think.
Well, David, we talked about a lot. What else did I not ask you about that you wanted to share?
Well, I think you've covered everything pretty thoroughly. This is an unusual presidency, needless to say. And what historians will say about it 10 or 20 years from now will be quite interesting. I hope I'm around to read it and hear it. But his presidency is one which I think is causing a great deal of trauma in the minds of many people, not really sure about what's going to happen. And I think that he is someone, because he's not such a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, really, and I don't really believe he's a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, based on statements he's made in his former business life. And so I guess I would like to see him take a middle road where he does truly improve healthcare access for people and healthcare itself for people, where he does improve the infrastructure, where he does address the government deficit and total debt. So I think there are lots of areas where he could really make a name for himself as a president, a positive image for himself as president, if he would think about it, reflect, and move ahead in these areas.
Yeah, maybe set that ego aside, maybe.
Set his ego aside if that's possible for him. I'm not sure it is. Calm the rhetoric, and really, as he said during the campaign, bring people in, lock the door, and get them to work together until a solution is found to these problems.
Well, definitely, we have a few more months to see, obviously, of what's going to happen next.
Sure.
And we'll talk with you again about that.
Okay, good.
Great.
Thank you.
Dr. David Canervo, thank you so much, Professor Emeritus here at Austin Peay's Political Science Department. And I'm Micah Terrell for GovsTV and 91.9 Public Affairs.